Okay, Kinesiology 223. This is chapter 23, presentation number 5, parents. As I mentioned before, you kind of have this triad, especially in youth athletes, youth athletics. You have the parent, the athlete, and the coach. And the influence of the parents is quite large. They can be wonderfully helpful, but they can also be very challenging to deal with and sometimes be incredibly undermining to what you're trying to accomplish as a coach. They are the primary socializers, the primary role model, the primary provider, and the primary interpreters for the children on your team. And you know, the parents have to learn how to just enjoy the moment. They really do. So often, parents become overly intoxicated, if you will, with the proximity to their young athlete, and they get really wrapped into the moment and they become like the armchair quarterback, but who's standing behind you telling you to run, a particular play because the ball's going to go to his son. So the one of the great things I saw was, especially if you're somebody who's coaching your own son, to be able to get in the car after a game, and even if you're the coach or if you're just a parent driving your child home, it's never, ever critique time. You don't critique your child, unless, of course, they ask you, but you don't critique your child. It becomes, man, I really enjoyed watching you play today. And it becomes about that as opposed to you critiquing what's good and what's bad. And to some regard, what happens is if they start critiquing what's good and what's bad, it might be actually undermining some of the things that you've said are good and some of the things that you've said as a coach are bad because you're viewing this in a much bigger picture because you're a better educated coach than the parent is. So they found that parents, they play this role as noted, and they end up being all of those things, plus the Uber, plus the bank, plus the scheduler, the master scheduler for the hitting coach and the speed coach and the fielding coach. And it's a matter of you have these parents who are really actively involved, and so they have this really heavy influence on the child, both good and bad. And the the parents themselves, um, they have their own measure of enjoyment, and they found that parental enjoyment of physical activity was related to parents um, encouraging their children's involvement, and in turn, that encouragement influenced the child's perceived competence in actual participation. So they're what they're saying is, you know, the kid gets in the car and I really enjoyed watching you play. It's really fun for me to sit in the stands and enjoy watching you play. That's going to spill over into the child's perceived competence and actual participation. And you're going to see an increase in performance because you're talking about how much you enjoy watching them play, not critiquing their play. Big difference. Um, the pressure that the athletes feel, and I mentioned it before, you have this kind of state anxiety that, or trait anxiety, excuse me, that the athletes bring in. And part of that is a little bit of state anxiety as well, because of the environment that they are in the family milieu. And the and this is the complexity of it, right? Because different people, different behaviors, different parents will have different behavioral artifacts and things that they deal with in terms of their own upbringing, and they spill over into their own child. But what they find is, um, negative interference by parents included parents coaching their child from the sidelines in a way that contradicted how they were taught by their coach. Um, the official, or the parent, excuse me, screaming at the official is another way. They encourage their child to fight. They say bad things to opposing players. Look, if you're a parent, a grown adult, and you're watching a bunch of 12-year-olds run around on a football field and you're screaming at the other team, heckling the other players, you got issues, my friend, and you shouldn't be there. Um, Now, actions that are positive include, uh, positively motivating the children, etc. Um, and to a certain degree, you have to have this communication between parents and coaches to be able to kind of have this going here. Facilitating actions included parents positively affecting the motivation of their children and disciplining their child for misbehaving in practices. If the coach goes to the parent and says, "Man, your kid was kind of having a bad day in practice today," that's a fair statement to make, and it's very much where that parent should hear that. And in a quirky sense, I'll tie this back to my comment regarding what teachers have to go through. When a teacher disciplines a child, many times the parent picks up the phone and calls and yells at the teacher and says, "Why are you disciplining my child?" When in some regards, probably the teacher would love to say, "Why don't you raise your child better?" And here you have a coach who has to pull a parent aside and say, "Hey, your child was really acting up at practice today." And what they're inferring here is that that can actually happen and there won't be any kind of blowback from the parent onto the coach. I challenge if that's going to happen or not. I mean, it depends how you actually run your practice. It depends the expectations you set with the parents on the front end, and it determines by the expectation you set with the athletes on the front end. But I just wanted to compare and contrast that because this kind of struck me as funny in terms of a parent will discipline their child for misbehaving in practice, but they'll more than likely pick up the phone and yell at the teacher for disciplining their child in the classroom. Part of it could be a skewed sense of priorities as well. Just saying. All right, I'm gonna get back to this. Now I'm off my soapbox. Research for youth sport and parenting. There are numerous studies. You can pretty much find hundreds of them if you want. But the parents inherently tie their success to the success and the achievements of the child. If Johnny does good, dad feels great. If Jennifer does good, mom feels great. Or mom and dad, they can both feel good for Johnny and Jennifer. They will spend a ton of money to make their children better. They will pour money into the prospect of their child being better. And I'll give you an example of this here in a moment. And in some regard, you're taking away the autonomy of the child because the parents become so overly involved. I had one parent who wanted me to work with his child and do a lot of speed agility work to help him become better at basketball. And the father, was talking with me. He's like, "Well, my side of the family is short. We're all 5'7". He goes, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Well, he's probably not going to get over 5'7" or 5'8", so you have a limiting factor there." And to try to make his son better had a built-in limitation to it. And so to that regard, as a person who is training his son, I had to be brutally honest with his son. "I'll be happy to work with your son as long as you want, but you got to understand that there might be a point where he gets to high school level, and that might be it because of maybe the height limitation that you've just mentioned in your family. I'm not picking on you, it's just what you told me." So, that was a concern where he was trying to work on how his son could be a better basketball player with that limitation built into his family DNA. So the parents themselves sometimes have to be guided and kind of pull back a little bit. And it's hard for parents because that's where their self-worth is. And many of these parents, they just get overzealous. And with this, they talk about they talk about having these reinforcing behaviors, if I can say it like that. And you have this kind of, if I can just kind of wrap up what I'm talking about up here in the top, is the concept of how you have a sport parent, right? And you have this kind of a little niche in terms of how you can have this sport parent expertise and be able to work with your parents and have them, adopt certain behaviors that increase the probability of the child achieving sport success, but also having a healthy experience. And they list 6 of these to the right. I talk these over here. 6 postulates were forwarded to maximize expertise. These included parents doing the following. Here are 4 of them, but we'll go ahead and bring the rest of them up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll let you pause and read through those, but they're going to echo a lot of the things we've already talked about in this course. And I think if you're going to be a coach, these are some of the things that you really have to kind of have built into your strategies as a coach to work with the parents. Coaching own child. Whole page is green. Look at that. Parents can oftentimes be accused of playing favorites, giving their child more opportunities or special consideration of other children. Conversely, they might be extremely hard on their own child, just as like a lightning rod to show that they're not showing favoritism. So with this study here, they interviewed male under 12 soccer players and their fathers who coached them and several teammates. The sons indicated that they perceived a number of benefits and costs associated with being coached by their fathers. These included perks, praise, technical instruction. They also included that their dad understood their ability and provided insider information, involved them in decision making, and provided them with special attention, quality time, and motivation. The costs perceived by the players include pressure, expectations, negative emotional response, lack of understanding, and empathy. So we can be incredibly hard on our own children when we coach them. I coached my own child in football, and it was a great experience, but make no mistake about it, there were a couple times where I may have unfairly lit him up more than others on the field, but that was a spillover of me carrying maybe my own frustrations with something else from the house onto the practice field. It's hard sometimes to have those be mutually exclusive from one another. And I think the book does a good job here of outlining these. Now I'll say go ahead and pause this and maybe review this a little bit more for your own benefit in case you ever work with your own child. But the parents can play a highly positive or negative role in the experience of their own child. And they have these 12 items that they go through. And they talk about educating parents and, setting the expectations, inform the parents of what's acceptable behaviors, inform regarding the overall program philosophies, and define the roles of a coach, the parent, and the athlete. So when you're going to have your own programs and coach your own athletes, this is where you want to spend some time in terms of where does the responsibility of the parent end and where does the responsibility of the coach begin. You don't go into their house to tell them that it's homework time. The parent shouldn't come onto the practice field to tell the athlete how to do a particular skill. Mutually exclusive, there has to be a separation in there between those. So you have to educate the parents. And with this, I would say maybe pause this and take a read. You're going to have some conversation with your parents, and it's become much easier now with technology to be able to reach parents and have kind of like a quick conversation maybe once every other week. But again, I would say this is kind of key. Good sporting behavior, team rules, having an understanding of what the actual relationship is, and perhaps you even design your program to have one particular assistant coach be the parent liaison, the person who handles all the parenting issues. So I've had many examples in many situations. I've had one parent who tell me their kid should be the running back, and the way the league was set up because of his age and because of his weight compared to the other kids, if he even touched a football, the play was whistled dead. So every time our quarterback would have handed him a football, we'd have a 4-yard loss or a 3-yard loss. He was what's called a striper. He had a stripe on his helmet. It was nonsense. It was just a matter of the parent not understanding what the rules of the league were to protect the other children, yet he was adamant his son should be a running back. Nonsense. So, I was the one left to kind of talk him through that process. Anyways, I'm going to break from here. I have one more presentation. I'm moving on.